Well now, sugar, would you mind sitting a spell with me while the cicadas tune up for dusk? That first whiff of honeysuckle just slipped through the screen, and, Lord have mercy, it yanked my heart straight back to a night when the heat sat heavy as a quilt. Bless your sweet heart, baby. If this porch-side yarn already feels like home, tap that little thumb so I'll know you're here. Later, drop me a note and maybe hitch your wagon to this channel. Now, where was I? I swan. That stubborn smell always comes knocking the same way. Soft at first, then all at once, marching straight past every locked door I built inside my own mind. Hard to believe a handful of drifting petals can tear open time like a paper envelope, but here we are. Makes my old heart skip a beat. Oh yes, Clara Mae Hollingsworth, born Birchwood County, Mississippi, 1937, still kicking hard enough to scuff the porch paint. I reckon this silver hair and these liver spots make me look twice my age, but inside, I'm still the barefoot girl who learned silence can weigh more than any hymn book. I've buried 3 husbands, sugar, and only one laid himself down proper. The other 2, well, folks say curses. I say necessity. Funny how a scent can unearth a memory you thought was buried deeper than catfish in the pearl. Tonight it's honeysuckle. Last week the scrape of organ keys I haven't touched since Easter. Sometimes just the creak of this swing when the wind shifts west. They're ghost notes on my shoulder, reminding me why sleep slips through my fingers like river silt. Back in 1955, May 28th, the air smelt just like this when I took vows with Billy Ray Sutton. He was all jaw and jealousy, but Mama said, "Stand by your man." So I stood, even when my knees bruised on pine floorboards. 7 years later, the coroner wrote cardiac failure. The church ladies baked casseroles, and the only ones who knew different were the Lord, bless his heart, and a half-empty jar of buttermilk hidden behind the pie safe. After Billy Ray came Franklin Hightower, money like kudzu, temper twice as quick. His mansion stairs were polished enough to fool any jury, and they surely did. I wept honest tears at his funeral, because by then I knew grief is love with its roots showing, and I loved the life his signature bought me, even if I freed it with my own 2 hands. When 1990 rolled in, the Lord set quiet Joe Ellis on my porch. He held every secret in my gaze and never asked the price. Said, "Whatever you done, Clara Mae, you done it 'cause you had to." For the first time, my chest quit clenching at night. And when he passed natural in 95, I feared the hush in the house more than any sheriff's knock. Now it's 2026, and the world outside scrolls faster than a hymn sheet in a hurricane. But out here, time still sways slow. That honeysuckle keeps whispering, "Tell it, Clara Mae," before the weeds grow over the words. So here I sit, in Joe's quilt, porcelain cup sweating in my palms, ready to unspool the thread you came to tug. What haunts me isn't the burying, nor the rumors, nor even Judgment Day. It's the pause between swing squeaks when I wonder whether the devil I dragged out of my kitchen was any different from the one camped in my marrow. Stick around, honey, and by the end, maybe you'll decide for yourself. I reckon the very first memory that still rings clear. As Sunday bells is the way dawn rolled across Birchwood County like a soft-footed barn cat, nudging pink light through our clapboard windows while rooster crows tangled with Mama's hymn humming. Back then, sugar, the world moved slow as sorghum in January. We measured seasons by when the okra first flowered, when the river cypress dropped its last rust-red needle, when the organ at Rock of Zion Baptist warmed the rafters with, "How Great Thou Art." I was Clara Mae Sutton in those days, barefoot, gap-toothed, and certain the Lord painted sunrises special just for me. Daddy worked the sawmill before the whistle, came home smelling of pine sap and sweat, and each evening he rubbed calloused hands over my braids, saying, "Little bit, keep your eyes open wide, kind hearts shine brighter than brass." Mama baked biscuits light as angel wings and kept a wildflower vase beside the portrait of her own mama, lost to influenza. Sometimes I'd catch her staring at that picture with a far-off ache that made me wonder how love could float on after flesh turned to dust. Summers meant lightning bugs in mason jars, a hand-me-down radio whispering Hank Williams through the porch screen, cherry Kool-Aid staining my lips, and the hush that fell over Main Street when the ice truck finally rattled by. School let out at 3, but my lessons never ended. Etiquette from the church ladies, quilting from Aunt Laverne, scripture from Reverend Amos, patience from the old hound sleeping across my bare feet. I believed back then, honest and whole, that goodness always boomeranged home, that if you fed the stray and mended the neighbor's fence, kindness would circle back like a warm wind. I dreamed the small dreams that felt big to a country girl. Maybe I'd play organ alongside Miss Geraldine. Maybe I'd find a beau who'd carve our initials into the sycamore. Maybe I'd own a dress the color of storm-cooled skies. The county fair came each October, and the Ferris wheel tilted me high enough to glimpse the river curving silver through cotton fields. I'd close my eyes, feel the seat swing, and swear I could float forever if I just believed hard enough. Yet the grown-up world hovered at the edges. Papa's cough after sawdust days, Mama's whispered worries over bills, the way sheriff lights sometimes painted our dirt road blue, chasing trouble that never seemed far from hungry folks. When I turned 12, Papa's accident took 3 fingers and most of his laughter. Mama began selling pies to the undertaker's wife, and I tagged along, learning how quiet hangs thick in a room where sorrow has only just settled. The funeral parlor was cool as a cave, floral sweet, and the director, Mr. Leland Greer, showed me how to polish brass handles until I could see my own freckled reflection staring back. Older, braver, maybe a tad too curious. That hush, that practiced gentleness, planted a seed. I thought, if I can keep my hands steady in the presence of goodbye, what storm could ever shake me? So at 16, when Mr. Greer offered after-school work, straightening hymnals, arranging sprays, I said yes, even though Mama wrung her apron, whispering, "Honey, that place will put shadows in your eyes." Maybe it did, but it also taught me reverence, the hard math of life and death, and the quiet comfort that blooms when you guide someone's sorrow without letting it soak clear through your own skin. By 18, I was headstrong as a wild filly, convinced heartache only visited other folks. I still pinned my hopes on hymns, honeysuckle breezes, and the promise that good people couldn't help but return good and kind. Bless my naive heart. Little did I know the world was already sharpening lessons I'd learned bruise by bruise. Yet even now, wrapped in this quilt, I can taste those summers on my tongue, sweet and sharp as green apples, and I sigh because I miss believing that kindness was the tallest fence a girl could build. Ain't that the truth? It was the summer of 1954 when the Pearl River swelled past its banks and left half the county tiptoeing through mud, and that very flood delivered the one ripple that would pull my whole life downstream. I remember I'd just finished dusting the funeral parlor pews when Mama burst through the doorway with her apron still flowered, hollering that the Baptist youth group needed extra hands to haul sandbags before the levee gave way. So I grabbed my penny loafers and hurried behind her, skirt hem splashing brown water all the way to the church steps, and there, Lord have mercy, stood Billy Ray Sutton, sleeves rolled, hair slicked damp, laughter flashing like heat lightning as he hefted burlap sacks 2 at a time. I'd known the Sutton boys in passing, all elbows and mischief, but something that day made him look carved from the very cypress roots trying to save us. And when he caught me staring, he tipped his chin, said, "Evenin', Miss Clara Mae," with a grin so sure of itself I felt my pulse tumble. I couldn't have told you why my heart knocked louder than the hymn drum, yet there it was, boom, right against my ribs, like somebody struck a match under my breastbone. We worked shoulder to shoulder till dusk painted the sky sorghum dark, swapping small talk, Daddy's sawmill, his uncle's cotton gin, my secret wish to play organ for revivals, and each word fell easy as pecans in October. After the last bag settled, Billy Ray offered to walk me home along the ridge road where frogs chirped their twilight blessing, and somewhere between the cedar grove and Mama's clothesline, he plucked a soggy honeysuckle bloom, tucked it behind my ear, and said real gentle, "Figure the river ain't the only thing overflowing tonight." I near about melted. Nobody'd spoken to me like I was something fragile and bright at the same time. That flood receded, but Billy Ray kept rushing back, popping by the parlor with cold colas, waving from the bleachers at Friday ball games, carving C+B into the sycamore I once dreamed about. Daddy chuckled that the boy had more charm than sense. Mama fretted his family's whiskey-still rumors, yet every caution felt muffled behind the drumbeat in my chest. One afternoon, he surprised me outside Miss Geraldine's organ lesson, handed over a creased letter he'd pinned on feedsack paper, asking if I'd meet him at the county fair come October. I read those shaky lines beneath the magnolia, petals drifting like soft yeses, and thought if kindness ever circled back, surely it wore Billy Ray's smile. October arrived smelling of caramel corn and sawdust. The Ferris wheel groaned skyward, and when our seat swung high, I saw the river again, silvering under moonlight, and swore the whole wide world narrowed to the brush of his calloused thumb across my knuckles. He asked right there, voice trembling like a hymn note, if I'd marry him when the dogwoods bloomed, and though a flicker of dread whispered from some deep hallway inside me, I nodded because hope is loud and fear is shy in an 18-year-old heart. Looking back, maybe it wasn't Billy Ray alone that changed everything. Maybe it was the river reminding me life could rise sudden, unstoppable, swallowing fences we thought stood firm. But in that moment, I only knew my breath hitching, his brown eyes shining, and the Ferris wheel creak echoing forever. I couldn't explain why my heart beat faster. Was it love, or the hush of something darker slipping into place? Yet I clung to his promise like a hymn refrain I wasn't ready to finish singing. And that, child, is how a swollen river and a boy with a honeysuckle grin set the first stone on a road I never meant to walk, but couldn't turn from once the water carried me. It was barely 2 months after Billy Ray slipped Grandmama's gold band on my finger, and the dogwoods still fluttered their white confetti across Birchwood Road when the shine began to tarnish in ways only a bride can spy. First, a sigh too sharp, then a grip too tight, then words that landed like boiled peanuts hurled at a tin roof, harmless in sound yet ringing long after silence returned. I told myself newlyweds take time to find the same rhythm, but the tempo kept quickening till every sunrise felt like the buzz before a wasp's sting. One Friday, he strode through our screen door with liquor on his breath and pay stub gone to dice, found gravy cooling instead of simmering, and set his fist to the wall mere inches from my ear. No bruise on me, but the sheetrock cracked like a photograph frame, and my smile cracked with it. Next morning, the church ladies delivered a casserole and knowing looks. News travels crooked and quick in a town this small, and I tasted their pity same as salt. Daddy offered quiet comfort, said, "Little bit, you can always come home," but his cough now rumbled like a busted engine, and Mama's eyes pleaded for peace, so I kissed their cheeks and swore things would smooth over come revival season. Trouble is, revival wines only whip the sparks higher. Billy Ray grew jealous of every gaze that strayed my way after Sunday service. He shadowed me to the funeral parlor, accused Mr. Greer of courting my smile, and by August forbade me to work altogether. Losing that hush-cooled sanctuary felt like someone folded shut a book mid-sentence, leaving my thoughts trapped between pages. I tried stitching calm into the seams of our evenings, pot roast aromas, hymns hum soft, taming my laughter so it wouldn't sound like invitation, but dread took up residence behind my ribs, tapping with each heartbeat. This isn't living, child. It's waiting. One sweltering night, the radio announced fresh layoffs at the mill, and Billy Ray pitched his whiskey glass clean across the porch, shards catching moonlight like little alarms. He cried after, slumping to the boards, swearing he only feared losing me the way the town was losing everything else. I held him, tasted copper worry on my tongue, and wondered if love meant binding yourself to storms with no shelter in sight. Outside, voices turned against us too. The sheriff nodded stiff whenever Billy Ray passed, hint enough he'd heard the shouts. Reverend Amos prayed pointed prayers about temper and temptation. Even best friend Violet May stopped visiting, scared her boys might witness something that couldn't be unlearned. Yet leaving felt like admitting the vows were hollow, and shame is a heavy quilt on Mississippi nights. Inside, I wrestled two versions of myself, the girl who believed kindness circles back, and the woman cataloging bruises on her spirit, plotting silent arithmetic. How many apologies equal one shiver of fear? I'd kneel beside the bed each evening, asking the Lord for either courage or mercy, not sure which would arrive first. No one truly knew the storm inside me. I sewed my secrets into pillow seams, kept my voice sweet in public, and watched the calendar inch toward the county fair where our story began, aching for a sign as clear as that rising river had once been. What if the tide was already turning, just hidden beneath polite Sunday smiles? The dilemma seated itself deep. Stay and risk drowning in his rage, or swim for shore and face the whispering tongues of birchwood. I'd been taught a good wife endures, yet the shadow in Billy Ray's eyes told me endurance might turn me to stone. Each dawn, cicadas tuned up and I lay staring at ceiling cracks spreading like tributaries, knowing sooner or later the waters would rise again. And this time I would either build a stronger levee or let the flood carve a new path entirely. The night the storm finally split open, my quiet resistance began like any other Mississippi August evening, the air thick enough to drink and the cicadas grinding their rattles into the sky. Billy Ray paced the porch boards with a bottle that had my name on every swallow, muttering about layoffs and fools and how a wife ought to keep supper warm no matter how late trouble staggers home. And with each slur, my heart drummed harder, a panicked bird beating for daylight it could not find. I set the milk to chill in the icebox, stirred in the dash of white powder Mr. Greer once used to hush funeral flowers against the heat, and told myself it was only mercy, only a gentler hush than any fist he might swing before dawn. When the grandfather clock in the parlor chimed 11, deep, solemn, like a church bell mourning its own secret, I walked that glass of milk to the porch. Time felt syrup slow, every creak of the floorboard ringing clear as crystal, and I swear the second hand on Mama's old wall clock froze mid-tick, the air holding its breath with me. Billy Ray took the glass, eyes tired and wild, and for a heartbeat I almost begged forgiveness, almost let kindness boomerang and strike me down. But the bruise blooming beneath my collarbone pulsed a different gospel. Survive. He drained it in 2 gulps, wiped his mouth on the back of his hand, muttered something about good girl, and lumbered inside, boots thudding like distant thunder retreating. I sat there on the swing, quilt drawn up to my chin though the night still sweated, and listened to the house settle, chair scraping, boots kicked free, the bedroom door snicking shut, until a silence so pure it hummed filled every knot in the wood. I thought I would feel triumph or terror. Instead came a hollow emptiness, the kind a church pew bears after the final hymn fades. Around midnight, a whip-poor-will called once, twice, then no more, and Billy Ray's breath hitched down the hall, caught, and never rose again. I didn't move right away. I counted heartbeats like rosary beads, waiting for guilt to lay its cold hand on my shoulder, yet all I felt was my own pulse settling into a strange calm. At dawn, the rooster crowed, and the sun bled peach over the window pane, and I walked to the bedroom, saw him lying there gray and still, one hand flung toward the quilt square Mama had sewn for our wedding. Tears slid honest down my cheeks because some part of me grieved the dream I'd buried alongside the man. But woven through that sorrow was a fierce, quiet knowing. I had traded one life for another, lit the lantern that would guide me, alone at first, but breathing. When I phoned the sheriff and Mr. Greer, my voice shook exactly as a widow's should. When the coroner marked cardiac failure, my knees buckled with authentic relief. And when the church ladies gathered casseroles again, their whispered suspicions fluttered like moths against a light they could never name. In that single eternal stretch between the glass touching his lips and the rooster greeting dawn, I lost the last scrap of innocence I'd clung to since girlhood, yet I found a raw resolve that would shape every footstep after. Some bridges burn with flames you can see. Mine smoldered quiet in a belly full of tainted milk, and the smoke slipped only through cracks inside my own chest. From that day forward, I understood kindness can still bloom, even when the garden is watered with truth no one dares speak. And I no longer prayed for mercy or courage, only for the wisdom to bear both the weight of my choice and the hush that followed. Dawn after the funeral opened like a door to an empty house. Nothing inside but echoes, and I walked through each room listening for the life I'd bargained away. Billy Ray's boot still leaned by the porch rail, his shaving brush stiff with last week's lather, yet the air had changed temperature, thin as winter breath despite the August heat. Folks brought casseroles and pie enough to feed a revival, but grief stole my appetite and guilt stole all flavor, so I packed the tins into Mama's icebox and let them frost over like memories I wasn't ready to thaw. Days bled together quiet as cotton bowls. The sawmill whistle no longer matched my heartbeat, and each cicada rasp sounded like a question I could not answer. I rose at sunrise because habit is louder than mourning, polished the parlor table until the wood looked back at me with weary eyes, and practiced the hymns Miss Geraldine left on the organ bench, fingers stumbling where confidence once danced. People said I was brave, standing straight beside that pine coffin, veil barely trembling, but bravery felt more like vacancy, a hollow flattened by the weight it once carried. Mama whispered scriptures about valleys of shadow. Daddy coughed deeper and deeper, and I nursed him nights, hearing in his wheeze the same fragile thread that held my own soul together. When he passed that winter with snow rare as angels on Mississippi ground, I buried him on the hill above the river and realized the hush inside me had a companion now. Sorrow nested in my ribs, lined its walls with questions no preacher could untangle. The church lady's pity shifted to suspicion, then settled into wary politeness. Eyes followed me at the mercantile. Voices softened when I entered, and though no one spoke the rumor outright, I felt its chill sweep through doorways ahead of me, a hush that tasted of tin and trepidation. Work at the funeral parlor became my refuge. Ironic, ain't it? But the silence of the viewing room matched the calm I carried, so I arranged lilies and straightened hymnals as if order might anchor me to something true. Mr. Greer noticed my new stillness, called it poise, but I knew it was simply the absence of beating wings. Some evenings I'd sit on the back steps, skirt tucked under, watching sunset burn the river bronze. I'd ask the wind if God still kept tally of a heart's intentions, or if actions alone wrote the final ledger. No thunderbolt replied, only owls turning dusk into questions. My faith bent, but did not break. Instead, it grew quiet, like a candle shielded by cupped hands, flickering yet stubborn. I prayed shorter prayers, just a sigh and a name, and trusted the Lord understood the spaces between words. Kindness no longer felt like a circle returning, but a seed buried deep, uncertain if spring would find it. I learned to live small, one biscuit instead of two, one laugh stifled before it carried, one footstep soft so the floorboards wouldn't accuse me. And in that pared down hush, I discovered a strange clarity. I was not the same Clara Mae who boarded the Ferris wheel dreaming in moonlight. She lay beneath freshly turned soil alongside every what if. Yet the woman who rose carried a spine forged in quiet fire, steady enough to guide strangers through their own valleys. Seasons rolled. Peach blossoms, cotton blooms, cypress needles, and grief mellowed into a polite tenant rather than a thief. By the time spring of 61 unfurled its green promise, I could hear larks again without tasting sorrow, though the hush never left. It sat beside me at church, followed me through grocery aisles, and curled warm on the porch swing come twilight. I was alone, yes, but not unmoored. Emptiness had shaped me into a vessel capable of holding more than fear, even if I didn't yet know what would fill it next. Ain't that the truth? Spring of 1962 tiptoed in on dogwood petals the color of forgiveness, and one bright Thursday, the silence that had camped beside me for 7 long seasons rustled as if stirring from its own sleep. Mr. Greer sent me to deliver sheet music to Rock of Zion because the ladies' circle was fixing for homecoming Sunday, and while I stacked hymnals on the front pew, a deep baritone voice drifted from the balcony, gravely yet gentle, humming softly and tenderly like it was stitched straight to his lungs, and I felt a flicker inside so small I nearly mistook it for hunger. I looked up into dust-lit rafters, and there stood Franklin Hightower, tall, gray at the temples, though he couldn't have been much past 40, suit pressed crisp as a fresh-ironed hope, tuning the old pipe organ with a wrench in one hand and a cloth in the other. He smiled down, said he'd caught a squeak in the middle C, and figured no congregation should worship through a crooked note. Something in his steadiness, the careful way he pressed each key, reminded me of Daddy sanding cedar toys back when morning still smelled of sawdust and easy laughter. We spoke only a minute, small talk about valves and varnish, yet as I left, the hush following me felt different, not empty but expectant, like soil right before rain. 2 days later, a delivery truck pulled to my porch, and the driver handed me a parcel wrapped in brown paper. Inside lay a new silk organ cover embroidered with lilies and a note. Every instrument deserves a proper dress. May this one comfort your melody. F.H. My fingers traced the stitching, and for the first time since Billy Ray's passing, a smile rose unbidden, shy as a fawn at tree line. I pressed the cloth to my cheek, whispering thanks, though no one heard. That Sunday, I slipped into the choir loft early, arranged the cover, and felt the keys under my hands, like old friends finally ready to talk again. When service ended, Franklin offered his arm down the narrow stairs, not presuming, just present, and something inside me exhaled. Weeks turned to patterns. Tuesday evenings he tapped politely on the parlor door, asking if I'd lend an ear to a new hymn arrangement. We'd sit 2 arm lengths apart on the settee, coffee cooling untouched as we traded stories about river fog and childhood tin roof storms. And though memories of fists and cracked sheetrock still lurked, their edges dulled each time his voice folded mine into gentle laughter. He never pressed, never pried. He simply made space, like a lantern held steady so another might see the path herself. One rainy afternoon, a bolt of lightning rattled the window, and without thinking I reached for his hand. The warmth startled me, soft and solid, and I realized the hush in my chest had shifted from cemetery stillness to chapel quiet, reverent rather than vacant. Mama, frail yet keen, noticed the color returning to my cheeks. She patted my wrist and whispered, "The Lord don't plant new blossoms unless he means for 'em to bloom." I wasn't sure about blooming, but I found myself humming while mending linens, writing little notes of scripture to tuck into casseroles for shut-ins, stepping lighter down Main Street even when whispers still nipped at my heels. Helping others heal inside the funeral parlor felt less like penance and more like purpose. I'd straighten a crooked boutonniere and hear Franklin's patient tone praising a well-tuned chord, and hope, timid, green, but alive, would lift its head. One evening, I caught my reflection in the display room mirror. Same silvering hair, same eyes that had watched a life drain away, yet now a spark hovered behind the tired, a promise that my heart could learn another rhythm. I set my shoulders, smoothed my skirt, and thought, maybe kindness doesn't always circle back the way you expect. Sometimes it arrives quiet, wearing work gloves and carrying sheet music, and all you have to do is open the door wide enough to let the melody in. Autumn of 1970 rained gold over Hightower Manor, yet inside its velvet halls I breathed only dust and dread, until the night I chose to break the echo. Franklin's fortune had fattened every room with chandeliers and Persian rugs, but his affection had thinned to suspicion, his praise to cold inventory. Where I went, whom I smiled at, what tune lingered on my lips, until fear clung to me like static, and mirrors showed a woman shrinking beneath her own pearls. One October evening, after a dinner choked silent by his tally of imagined betrayals, I followed the scent of bourbon to the landing where he swayed above the grand staircase, brandishing my organ sheet as proof of flirtation, eyes shining mean under candelabra glow, and while his voice cracked against the walls, I felt something inside me settle. Not rage, not panic, but a stillness shaped like truth. I would not bend again, not for a man, not for gossip, not even for the promise of respectability. I stepped forward, took the music from his trembling hand, and in that moment our gazes locked, time pooling thick around us, the grandfather clock below forgetting its next tick, and I realized no one else could grant my freedom. I had to claim it, or surrender forever. Franklin's foot slipped on polished mahogany, perhaps from drink, perhaps from the sudden absence of fight in my eyes. An instinct offered a choice. I could grip his arm and haul both of us backward into old patterns, or I could let the moment carry its own consequence. I released the crumpled pages, heard them flutter like startled doves, and watched gravity write the rest, his body tumbling down each step in brutal slow motion, a marionette of silk and bone, until he lay at the bottom, silent, a final chord unresolved. The thunder of that fall echoed through the corridors, yet inside me rang only one clear note. Survive. I knelt beside him, checked for breath, found none, and tears came honest but measured, mourning the hope I'd once worn. Like a new Sunday hat, rather than the jealous man before me. Before dialing the operator, I caught my reflection in the hall mirror, eyes steady, face pale, mouth a thin line of determination, and understood at last that my past would not determine the shape of my soul unless I allowed it. When the sheriff arrived, I recounted the stumble, the drink, the dreadful accident, and my voice did not quake because the story, in its bare bones, was true enough. Days later, after condolences wilted and the last of the reporters drifted away, I stood alone at the top of those same stairs, held Franklin's signet ring between finger and thumb, whispered a prayer neither of forgiveness nor damnation, but of acceptance. What's done is done. What lives must keep living, and dropped the ring into the foyer urn where it sank beneath dried lilies, a small surrender to silence. That single act untethered me from every chain of what-ifs, and a hush, different from the old graveyard quiet, filled the house. Clean, spacious like morning after rain, I packed 2 suitcases, left behind velvet drapes and accusations, and returned to Mama's modest clapboard where the porch swing still remembered my rhythm. As I crossed the threshold of that simpler home, I felt lighter than any hymn note, not because I escaped judgment, heaven keeps its own ledgers, but because I finally claimed authorship of my story. I vowed to live forward, no longer rehearsing regret, tending instead to the tender shoots of possibility, even if my hands bore the scent of past storms. That night, I lay beneath a patchwork quilt, cicadas humming lullabies through the screen, And for the first time in years, my heartbeat matched the earth's gentle pulse, steady, unafraid, ready for whatever dawn chose to deliver. You know, honey, when I rock here at dusk and watch the shadows slip long across the garden, I sometimes catch the girl I used to be, standing out by the sycamore, palms up, waiting for life to hand her every answer wrapped in a ribbon of good intentions. She believed kindness was a promise the world always kept, and that if she just held her breath through the hard parts, somebody stronger would fix the crooked things for her. It took 3 husbands, 2 funerals, and 1,000 sleepless porch nights for me to learn. The earth doesn't trade in fair deals. It offers seasons, and it's a body's work to plant or to uproot. I don't say that with bitterness, child, but with the calm that settles over cotton fields once the picking is done. See, the lesson isn't that love fails or that hope is foolish. Mercy, no. Only that neither is owed to us on schedule. We are the keepers of our own gates, and sometimes the choice is whether to oil the hinges or nail the boards shut. I've buried fear beside the men I lost, and what blooms there now is a steady kind of courage. Not the trumpet blast sort folks parade on Sunday, but a low heartbeat that reminds me I can sit with my mistakes without letting them chain my ankles. If I could slip a note to that barefoot girl at the tree, I'd write, "The river will rise whether you're ready or not, but you still get to choose which way to swim." And to anyone listening, maybe you, clutching your secret hurt like a keepsake, hear me when I say waiting for perfect safety is its own quiet drowning. The world whispers that patience is virtue. Sometimes it's just delay wearing perfume. Maybe it's time you stop scanning the horizon for rescue and start loosening the soil around your own roots. Plant something bold, even if your hands still tremble. Pack a suitcase, even if the map feels bigger than your courage. Speak a truth that tastes like iron, because unspoken words have a way of binding tighter than any vow. I once thought forgiveness meant folding myself small enough to fit someone else's comfort. But now I know it's a lantern you hang on your own porch, so the past can find its way home without stumbling through your doorway again. Loss still visits. Lord knows grief keeps its own spare key, but it no longer tells me where to sit or how to breathe. These days, when dawn slips in soft and gold, I make coffee strong, set an extra cup on the rail for whatever comes, and smile at the memory of every storm that thought it could drown me. Perhaps it's your turn to open a window and let the hush speak. See if the wind doesn't carry a question you've been afraid to answer. Ain't that the truth? Sometimes, sugar, when the evening shadows stretch all the way from my porch to the pasture fence, and the whip-poor wills strike up their mournful chorus, I catch myself setting an extra rocking chair a little off to the side, just in case a ghost of memory feels like visiting. And in that hush between the clink of my teacup and the next night breeze, I think about how many stories a heart can carry before it starts spilling them like marbles across a wooden floor. You've sat with me through river floods and funeral parlors, after midnight staircases and sunrise reckonings, and I hope, even if the truth prickled now and then, that you felt my words settle gentle in your lap, the way Grandma's quilt used to drape over mine. Life, I've learned, isn't so much a straight path as a patchwork of choices stitched with silence. Some pieces shine bright, some dark as indigo, yet every square matters to the warmth of the whole. So let me lean in real close and ask you plain. After all you've heard here tonight, do you reckon real love is bound to return the way a homing pigeon finds its roost? Or is it a wild thing that blesses us once and then flies on, leaving just feathers for keepsake? I ask because even now, weathered, wiser, and well aware the ledger of my days is shorter than the receipt roll at the mercantile, I still feel Joe Ellis's steady heartbeat in the quiet corners of this house. Sometimes when the kettle whistles, I'd swear I see his profile in the steam, half smile and all, as if he's waiting for me to pour 2 cups instead of 1. I'm not fool enough to claim I understand eternity, Yet I've come to suspect love doesn't mind squeezing itself into the smallest spaces. The scent of pipe tobacco that drifts in on a north wind, the creak of a porch board no one stepped on, the simple hush that settles when you finally speak a secret and the walls choose to keep it. Maybe that's the gift hidden inside every hard-won scar. We learn to recognize tenderness in forms we never imagined, and to offer it forward even when we know it may never circle back the same way. I suppose what I want you to feel, as you close this screen and wander back into your evening, is a warm flicker of courage, the kind that nudges you to check on a neighbor even if the words catch in your throat, or to forgive yourself for staying too long where kindness ran dry. If my tale stirs any restless thought in your heart, let it be this: waiting for perfect certainty is a luxury most souls can't afford. Sometimes you have to step into the dark with nothing but your own pulse for lantern light and trust that the ground will rise to meet you. So tell me, darling, if love did come knocking at your door wearing a new face, would you recognize its footsteps, or would the echoes of yesterday keep you from unlatching the screen? Drop me a line down in the comments and let my old eyes know how you'd answer. After all, stories live longer when they're shared, and a porch feels wider when company pulls up a chair. And if, by chance, you hear a soft whistle in the pines later tonight, don't be too quick to blame the wind. Sometimes I believe Joe still remembers the path home, and I like to think the same gentle map is folded somewhere in your pocket, ready whenever you're brave enough to unfold it. Ain't that the truth?